Hi everyone, welcome to the Babbling Irons. Today we're going to be discussing the Liverpool win against West Ham, the very fortunate win, all things considered. We'll try and go through a couple of things in the game that didn't go so well, and let's see if we can find some positives in what was otherwise another frustrating game in which VAR didn't intervene this time, but where VAR is the talk of the game rather than the game itself. So stay tuned, guys, and we're going to review the game. So, as I say, we played Liverpool last night. Had we won that game, I think it'd probably be fair to say that we would be safe. I would still put my neck on the line and say that we are safe, regardless of only being on 34 points. I do think we will get enough points between now and the end of the season to be safe. But last night would have been a very good step in the right direction had we at least secured a point against Liverpool, which was probably warranted based on the chances that both teams created. But, as is tradition and as is the way, that wasn't the case. Before we get into that, let's kind of, go with the lineup. So I think from our perspective, it really is not a surprise as to our lineup. I think it was pretty obvious, the team that we would be playing. It doesn't really change from here on out. I don't think many people are going to agree with these these ratings by SofaScore against the team. But again, it's based on factors that maybe we wouldn't kind of put in as part of our decision making when we kind of review that. But really, again, from the Liverpool perspective, again, we pretty much said that would be the team, bar Mantip. That was probably the only surprise in the lineup from a Liverpool perspective. But on the West Ham side, we know that midfield isn't really going to change. Again, Antonio, at the moment, he can't be dropped. And we'll go into why on that at the moment. And then obviously the back four, I think, is probably now how Moyes sees the back four being. But obviously we started the game. For once, we wasn't as, I guess, afraid in possession. We wasn't necessarily that aggressive in terms of closing down spaces and looking to kind of limit Liverpool. We did give them a lot of possession, but also you have to credit Liverpool for the amount of ball that they managed to maintain. Part of that is because, as we stated prior to the game, that one of the players we need to watch out for and be very cautious of and look to arguably man mark or even just kind of say to sacrifice a player out of possession to stand on was Trent Alexander-Arnold. We didn't do that. So we didn't limit the space that he had. We seem to be looking to try and utilise Antonio in which to do that, which sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. And ultimately, he got far too much time and space in which to collect the ball in nice little pockets and then spray the ball around the pitch. And he's also one of those players, much like Kevin De Bruyne, that doesn't need enough space in which to create opportunities, in which to pass between the lines. And if you allow a player such as that, they are going to dictate. And that's what happened. Trent Alexander-Arnold was able to get in those little pockets of space consistently and constantly throughout that game. And it meant that they were able to dictate the pace of it and be able to spray the ball around and essentially keep us penned in for a majority of the game. Now, part of that, for us being penned in, is slightly tactical because we do try and sit behind the ball. We're not overly active in our pressing or in our attacking play from a defensive point of view. So we do kind of make a rod for our own back and invite pressure. But also, by doing that, we also saw a lot of joy because of Trent Alexander came inside. And we'd also said about potentially keeping up Benrahma higher on the left. And we haven't put it on, but if you ever get a chance to look at the average positions, he's almost playing really high on the inside left-hand side, pretty much just ahead of Antonio, because that's where all the space was. So we were consistently getting really good inroads and getting down that left-hand side. Now, we were also, unfortunately, despite some of the great opportunities that we had in transition, especially down that side, we lacked that final pass, that final cutting edge, which meant that Liverpool were able to essentially manage those opportunities well enough and to prevent us from taking any of those chances. And again, if we was that little bit more decisive in our decision making, a little bit quicker in our thought processes, we may have actually got a bit more luck down that left-hand side and maybe even actually scored another goal beyond what we did. Now, despite us obviously having a lack of the ball, and despite some of the issues that did come from that left-hand side from an offensive point of view with wasted opportunities and poor decision-making, Benrahma did also do some good things. So whilst I will criticise when he does bad, I'll also praise when he does good, much as I've done with Souček and other players throughout the season. And with the goal, he does play an instrumental role, and his delicate, deft touch from a very high ball, which is incredibly difficult to do, is actually superb as well. And we take the early lead, which is obviously much the surprise to everyone. But again, it's Paqueta involved in anything good that seems to be coming out of our attack at the moment. It seems to be coming through Paqueta, and he is really now starting to find his feet. He's making much quicker decisions. He's releasing the ball more. He's anticipating contact far better than what he was previously. It also is maybe also an understanding more of how to play within Moyes' structure, and maybe also Moyes also allowing him a little bit more freedom in which to operate as well. But ultimately, obviously, it's a really great touch from Benrahma. He knows, obviously, if he tries to take it down, he's going to get tackled, and he's aware of the movement of Paqueta and just lays it a deft little pass into that left-hand channel, which obviously then Paqueta kind of moves forward, and Antonio does well because, again, he makes that defence drop because he then looks to sprint and move in behind. What Paqueta does incredibly well is as he comes forward, the link play with Antonio in this sequence was really good. He lays it into Antonio, but he doesn't stop. He doesn't labour. He carries on with his run, and it's an immediate one-touch layoff from Antonio, who again showed some really good understanding in this movement. Not only first off to drag the defence, then to hold a position to provide a pass to Paqueta, recognises that there's space on that side, and then releases Paqueta into that channel. And as Paqueta then drives forward the ball, again, have to comment on Benrahma. He comes across, he kind of moves that defence over. Antonio, again, reads where there's a pocket of space and where Paqueta's coming into. Paqueta's ability and the ability to turn quickly and to do it at pace, obviously then cuts through two players looking to press from either side. And Antonio's movement, again, just gives him a nice opportunity to lay the ball into him, which is great as well because he lures in Fabinho, and then obviously as the ball's laid in, he's able then to take it round Fabinho. Again, really good composure, good way of shields the ball well. Very good link play with Antonio. He's really well orchestrated between those two throughout this move. And then he unleashes a brilliant shot with his right foot, something that we haven't seen nearly enough of this year. And Alisson is unable to get to it. It's slightly left of centre, but it's hit with such ferocity and pace, the goalkeeper doesn't really have a chance. And at that point, we're maybe thinking upset because whilst we were being a bit passive, Liverpool having a lot of the ball, they weren't necessarily threatening as much. And we were doing a really good job in which containing them. And the way Liverpool play at the moment, they bring everyone central and they play really kind of compact way. The only real width is now coming from Robertson on the left-hand side when he kind of pushes out of that back three. And then you get the likes of, say, either Salah moving to the right. If he comes inside, it tends then to be Henderson going out into that right wing position. But they were quite compact throughout the game. And we were doing really quite well up until we lax defending once again. Provides Liverpool with a great opportunity. Even Moyes was very much to that point that we should have done better from a defensive standpoint. And I agree, we probably should have done better. There's a couple of players that maybe could have done a bit more in the situation in which to place pressure on Gakpo, maybe forced him to turn inside or to force the ball out wide. But instead, we allowed him time, we allowed him space. And ultimately, he then had a good shot, which you maybe could argue Fabianski should do more. But with it bouncing just in front of him, it's very harsh in which to say the goalkeeper should probably do more in that situation. And, again, as we say, he was trying to use Antonio, which to mark Trent Alexander-Arnold. Antonio was in a position where he's looking to anticipate where the ball is, going to when Robinson plays it into Alexander-Arnold. He does actually go a good level of intensity. He does actually sprint towards him. But because of where his starting position was, and again, this isn't actually a criticism of Antonio. Antonio actually does as well as he can do in this situation. He gets to Alexander-Arnold, but because Trent is able to get the ball out of his feet quickly, and also he doesn't need much space which to play a pass, he then plays it, with his second touch with a bit of zip into the feet of Gakpo. And unfortunately, Antonio is not able to get into position to provide enough pressure in which to prevent Trent Alexander-Arnold being able to make that pass into Gakpo, or even to force him maybe over to Matip on the far right-hand side, as you can see on the picture. But instead, he's able to play it through to Gakpo. In this situation, obviously, Souček is currently kind of marking Jota. What happens as it develops, as Arnold is getting it out of his feet, Souček starts to move over to Gakpo, but he kind of hesitates at that point and doesn't actually go for it. Also, Rice is in a good position in terms of where he needs to be from a midfield point, but we didn't necessarily recognise that we didn't have a player there in which to pressure Gakpo. So, in hindsight, maybe he could have come across more. He could have been looking at Gakpo, looking at Souček's position, and either calling Souček to drop much quicker or coming across himself in which to kind of create less space. But ultimately, that doesn't happen. And when the ball is played into Gakpo, to compound the situation, Souček actually gets almost alongside him, and rather than running directly at him to then try and put some pressure, he just continues in a straight line, and in the end just actually runs into Curtis Jones, who is standing where he is. Obviously, Jones stands where he is because then it encourages essentially both Aged and Zuma to drop. Now, Aged can't really come out because he can get blocked by, obviously, Jones, and that then creates an opening for Salah against, obviously against Cresswell. Also can open it up for a pass out wide to the right-hand side. As you can see, it's completely open. So had Aged moved out, there's a potential pass for Salah, or Salah's movement is going to drag out Cresswell to then obviously give a very good opportunity in the right-hand side. So because they had that central kind of overload there, it really caused us problems because we just kind of didn't really have the ability from a defensive point of view or from a defender's point of view to step out of the back line and come out, such as, Zuma. He wasn't able to kind of come out because Jones is in a position where he's pretty much restricting his movements. If he was to step out, he's going to block his path. Souček probably should have done more here, in which apply pressure. Also, a potential criticism for Rice, again, it's probably quite harsh, but when you watch the sequence, he kind of jogs back into position. There's no urgency to sprint back into position. And obviously, we've only recently just scored for about 5 minutes ahead or 4 minutes ahead. And this is when we should have had more urgency, a bit more energy in our stride in which to try and prevent and hold out that opportunity for as long as possible. But we just made wrong decisions. Again, Souček not actually going into Gakpo, Rice potentially not sprinting over as well, also made Gakpo's decision for him because he was unopposed and unimpeded. Now, at that point, it's a shot from a fair old distance. You would probably expect the goalkeeper to save it, but in fairness to Gakpo, it's a decent shot. It does take a bounce and almost then renders any kind of attempt from Fabianski as almost void, really. And at that point, it was frustrating because we started well in that we got ourselves ahead. We wasn't looking particularly threatened. Obviously, they were in control of the game in terms of possession, but we were in control of the scoreline at that point, and we then let that slip, unfortunately. And again, kept creating chances in that first half, coming down that left-hand side. But it's just that, again, that last final ball, that last bit of decision-making cost us dear, and we wasn't able to kind of get the goal, the necessary goal that we needed. Second half starting, we started really well. We had really good urgency. We were moving the ball well. We were looking to attack Liverpool, and we were looking good. We were kind of containing them in possession. We had a good defensive structure. We were defending well. Souček was defending really well with, obviously, Paqueta and Rice. There was really good energy in that midfield three. The defence looked pretty resolute and solid. Antonio was doing an honest job. Wasn't necessarily, if you look at the ratings, that he didn't do great, but he was doing an honest job in trying to apply that pressure, trying to get in position to limit what Trent could do or limit his space. But unfortunately, again, we have to give Alexander-Arnold a lot of praise. He was superb in his movements and his understanding of his role and getting into position. We unfortunately wasn't able to stop that with enough regularity in which to then try and impose ourselves. And we actually got ourselves ahead, but unfortunately Jeroboam was just slightly offside. It was a brilliant finish as well. The pass played through was fantastic, and he uses Van Dijk very well to kind of disguise where he's going to put it. Then he has another opportunity a bit later, very similar, but unfortunately, because he'd done it once, he doesn't want to do it again. And it's something that myself and Sloth have talked about, is if you're going to bury those chances, then you deserve every praise. But when you miss those chances, when you have support with you, it is incredibly frustrating, and you then have to question the player's decision-making. And in the second instance, it wasn't as good an opportunity as it was the first time when he actually then scored, despite obviously being ruled out by VAR. He had options on the edge of the area that he could have played to, but he decided to take it on himself. You could say it's commendable, but you'd also say that it's, again, maybe putting yourself above the overall team. If he scores it, fantastic, we'll praise. But when they don't score, you do then have to assess the options around and think, could they have done more? Could they have made a better decision? And, you know, that at that point, for me, it felt like our opportunity, our time had kind of been and gone. I think at that point, I didn't really see us getting a goal. I thought we had some kind of, we kind of threatened, or we looked to threaten on the counter, but it was nothing really kind of was clicking. Again, partly because of how well Liverpool counter-pressed. Again, Trent Alexander-Arnold coming into that midfield was really good, coming out and stopping us and winning the ball back up high. And we did struggle with that. And by playing the long ball game against Van Dijk and Matip is pretty much a completely fruitless task. And it just meant that the ball kept coming back. Antonio wasn't really able to get onto it nearly enough as we needed him to, because we needed him to turn their back line. But because we were forced at times to play a longer ball and a longer game because of Liverpool's press and counter-press kind of process, it did limit us in possession. And when Liverpool scored their goal, not only was it galling because of the errors that came in that goal, it was the fact that we also had a warning shot literally seconds before. Matip at a corner, a great shot, which Fabianski, fantastic reflexes. He didn't really know much about it, but again, he just put out a foot and put out a block. So at that point, we've had a warning. We've had a warning that Matip is a player that they are aiming for and someone we need to be aware of. Now, I understand every team has set routines, both offensively and defensively, but sometimes as players, you've got to take responsibility, be smarter and more intelligent, and start to look at the matchups or the mismatches and change things around. The fact that we put Benrahma in a position to man mark Matip is ridiculous, or at least to zonally mark him or to block him, regardless of whether he should have done better. And I'm going to comment on that, and he should have done better. He's not completely to blame. Other players or players within there should have seen that mismatch and taken responsibility, said, I'm going to do this, you go here, and reorganise to which to counter that threat. We didn't. We remained inactive in that respect. And you also then have to question as to at what point, from a management point of view, do you think it's a good idea when you are seeing Liverpool line up like that to allow that kind of mismatch, or to inform players that if those players are in that position, I want you to be there? There should always be contingency plans. There should always be, if we get a corner and these two players are here or coming or on that, if Benrahma's here or if someone else is there, you need to swap. So say Souček can be in there because he has the height, he has the physicality. Antonio, granted, was in there. He does have the physicality, but the whole decision-making and how we defended that second ball was terrible. There's just no other way in which to define it. It was so bad. Have to credit Liverpool because it was a well-worked routine, well scored by Matip, very good delivery, and brilliant screening or blocking, however you want to term it, from Fabinho in the middle as well. And so the mismatch, and this is where my frustration came also. They've just had a warning sign. Antonio stepping out of his zonal position to speak to Benrahma, to maybe give him some advice, to give him some sort of information, and then he steps back. And he watches the situation. Now, you can clearly tell, and you can clearly know, being a fan or being a player, you should know that in no way should Benrahma be put in that position. He's not strong enough in which to manage that. Yes, he could have just stood in the way and made himself like a speed bump and potentially got a foul. But again, he's not that type of player. He's not comfortable in that kind of situation. And we've put him in a situation that doesn't suit. There's no reason why we couldn't have, say, swap Benrahma with Paqueta at the near post, move Declan Rice out in which to manage Matip with Antonio to maybe watch then the run of Van Dijk, or again, even moved up Paqueta. The fact that we didn't recognise it is the most alarming point of it. Again, not calling out Souček maybe to get in there. It's so alarming that as a bunch of players, we haven't acknowledged that there is a mismatch and taken the responsibility to say, you know what, I'm going to take this. I'm going to manage it, rather than just going, this is our setup. This is what we're going to do. We've been so brilliant at defending set pieces all season. And one of the reasons is because we haven't allowed mismatches. We've marked up properly and we've managed to control. This one, it just went completely off the rails. And it's a great cross. Antonio's watching the whole situation as Robertson is getting ready to whip the ball in. He's watching the situation. He's very much aware. And initially, Benrahma does well. He gets in position. He kind of sets his feet and he kind of pushes out to Matip and pushes him away. And the problem is, he then doesn't continue that. He then allows him just to run, doesn't then step in his way. If he steps in his way, he's going to get the foul because he's going to be kind of coming across. Matip would just run into him, knock him over. We'd get a foul. Happy days. It's still 1-1, but he doesn't do that. And again, I can't even blame Antonio of this because he's then all of a sudden left with two players. Now, the only thing I would say is, as a criticism, is he doesn't make a decision either way. He either need to make a decision as which to press on to Van Dijk and kind of pressure him, or choose to go to Matip. Instead, he just kind of jots from side to side, looks at the players and makes no decision whatsoever, and ends up just being kind of like a rabbit in headlights ultimately, and just frozen to the spot. And it's just another instant where you just go, we just have to make a decision. There's no one making those decisive decisions, which is then obviously going to which to potentially help us out in this situation, because we just kind of freeze as a team in this situation. We are then caught out. And the other factor is Fabinho is doing a fantastic job in grappling Kurt Zouma. He's got his arms up high around his chest, not fouling, but causing contact and essentially blocking. He's not allowing Zouma to come out. As a result of his position where he is, again, Agüed is not able to sprint into a position to come out. You could argue maybe Declan Rice should be looking over his left shoulder to see what's coming, to maybe step out slightly from the where his current position is, as he's dropped into the 6-yard line, in which to again to cause Matip at least some sort of obstruction and maybe to restrict his ability to get a clean contact. But ultimately, he's allowed to complete free roll. As you can see, Rice has actually moved forward, which creates that space. You can see the cluster of players there from West Ham. That little white smidge is Fabinho, who manages to block both Aguerd and Zuma from getting anywhere near that near post area. And it's a bullet header that once Matip makes connection, there's no two ways about it. It's a brilliant header. You can't fault that. You can't fault goalkeeper. You can't blame a player on the line. It's just a bullet header. You just were not going to save that unless you're almost directly in that spot. And obviously then Liverpool took the lead. And at that point, as I say, I didn't feel we were really going to get into it. I felt, again, we needed to freshen it up. We did look a bit tired again. Much like we've seen in previous season, we are flogging the same players game after game after game. They put in a lot of hard yards recently, and it looked like they needed a rest, or a few players needed a rest. And whilst I'm not calling for a mass rotation, there is a need to rotate the team more, because if we keep flogging these players, if we want to get to the Europa Conference final, if we want to get ourselves secure over the next couple of games, the consistent flogging of these players is not going to help us reach those 2 joint goals. And obviously when we did bring on the subs at the moment, in particular, and I feel bad for saying it because he's come back from injury, but he really seems to be struggling to get any kind of momentum, any kind of real impetus in his play. In Cornet, it just looks very bitty, very disjointed, not real much connection. And unfortunately, at this point as well, Danny Ings is also looking like a terrible signing. We did say at the time, it's a player that doesn't fit our structure. He's always played really within a 2, and when he's played well within a 2, when he's been as a lone striker, it hasn't really worked. Doesn't have that much pace. He's a box centre forward. And again, he's come on. And whilst he does endeavour to try and do well and try and close down, ultimately, he's invisible on the pitch. And he's not bringing much to the play unless it's in their area. And we don't get it in the area enough for that type of player, or the way that he needs the ball to be played into him and players to work off of him. We don't operate in that way. And he is struggling, and at the moment he's one of our highest paid players. He does have a terrible injury history as well, so there's always that fear that he will break down, despite the goals against Nottingham Forest, which could prove to be vital. So you could argue, if you wanted to, those 2 goals in itself are worth their weight in gold if we stay up, because they were vital for us getting that win against Nottingham Forest. It's a complete mismatch, and we spent a long time chasing after Moffey. That obviously and ultimately didn't come through. The other options that were obviously offered weren't deemed as acceptable, or Moyes was not comfortable with them. And he put his money on Ings. Obviously, he was essentially a gift, as they would class it, because obviously they didn't really want to spend, but they trusted in Moyes and gave him the striker he wanted in Danny Ings. So they gifted him Ings, obviously paying him an extortionate amount of money. And you have to question the decision-making as to, one, why do we not have a sufficient backup to Terran Moffey, who is more akin to, say, the Antonio type of player that Moyes clearly prefers to work with? Why wasn't there a sufficient backup? Or if there was a backup, why did we not take that leap? Again, we also potentially, why are we not looking at bear in mind he played in the under-18s the night before? Why are we not looking at maybe the likes of Mubama, who is probably more an Antonio type within West Ham? He's probably the most like Antonio than others. He's physically not as strong, but he is a proactive presser run channels, will look to link play, and he's also fairly comfortable in front of goal. And you just look at it, Hammerhead. I know you. Whilst you're saying it's a Sullivan signing, it's Moyes. Moyes wanted him. Moyes tried to sign him when he was at Real Sociedad. He's now had his chance to sign him. Yes, he was a gift from Sullivan, but again, a gift. That term that I've seen put on the social media, saying that he was presented as a gift or is a gift to Moyes, can be taken in many different ways. Often because we don't like the board and we don't like Sullivan, when we hear the term gift, we think of it as he's just gone and bought a player off of a whim. I do not think he was bought on a whim. He was a player that Moyes identified, said he wanted, said he liked, and pretty much, bear in mind, we are not signing players unless he is signing it off. That is one of the things that has been kept set in stone and said a lot throughout the time. No player has been sanctioned unless Moyes is given the rubber stamp and given the approval. Ings is one of those. And I feel sorry for the guy because through no fault of his own, really, it's not working. He is trying. I can see him trying, but he's just invisible on the pitch and doesn't really bring her off much. However, he was involved in a very controversial moment. And as I say, when he's in the box, he is a player that can cause problems because he comes alive in the box. He's that type of player that when the ball is in the area, he is alert, he's aware, and he's looking and sniffing out chances. And it was one of those really frustrating ones because when I watched the incident, I 100% understand why it wasn't given. Not that I agree with it not being given. I understand why they haven't given it and the reasons that they would put around why it's not given. This screenshot in itself is maybe slightly provocative in the argument, but effectively, Thiago dives into the challenge. He lunges for the ball and completely misses it. Danny Ings essentially dinks it round the side of him. Now, if it wasn't for Thiago's arm, Danny Ings is receiving that ball on the other side. Now, obviously, if we were all saying that, or if we were happy that Souček's one against Chelsea, for instance, wasn't a handball, then this kind of follows those same lines. Now, again, proximity. His arm is still close to himself. It's also his supporting arm to go down. So there are many little caveats they could use in which to define as to it not being a handball. And also they could also potentially state that it wasn't deliberate. So there's many ways in which we can kind of get around it. They can get around it, not we can get around it. They can get around it. And that's kind of where the frustration is because the ball hits his hand more than once. If it hits his hand once and the opportunity goes, you would probably then have maybe less of an outcry because, again, as we say, proximity, he's falling at that time, it is his supporting arm, and you would argue or could argue it's very similar to the Souček incident earlier in the season against Chelsea where that wasn't given as a penalty. So there are elements of it which you can kind of say it kind of makes sense. Now, I believe it is a penalty. I agree with what was said in the coverage after the game. You have to punish bad defending. The rule has been essentially used to protect in this case, or the interpretation of the rule has now been used to protect this opportunity. And I don't think it's been used to protect Liverpool. I'm not going to say it's, Liverpool. It's not been used in which to protect them. It's been used in which to protect the on-field decision and to give them an out. Now, the thing that I have a problem with VAR, or actually not VAR, the problem that I have with the people sitting behind the table, sitting behind that, is the constant question of, they'll look at that and go, is it deliberate? Is it this? Is it that? And I'll get on to what Moyes said after, and that also will feed into what I'm about to say. they've looked at all of those aspects and gone, oh, well, he hasn't given it. I understand he's not giving it. It's not clear and obvious, is what they will say. Now, the question actually that they have to ask that is never actually stated is, had the referee awarded that goal, would you have called him back and said it was a mistake? Now, that is the one thing that needs to be proposed to all of these referees is if he would have given the opposite decision, would you be reviewing it and asking him to go and actually go to the monitor? If your answer is no, then you have to then turn around and say, you need to review that. If your answer is, if he gives that as a penalty in play, I'm not calling that back and asking him to review it, then you have just stated that is clearly in your mind that probably should be a penalty. If you think if he does the opposite and you would agreed with the opposite or you wouldn't have called it back, there's your mistake right there. And that's the clear and obvious element that is being completely misunderstood by the officials, or how they're not using that interpretation, or how they should be told to use that interpretation. Simple fact of the matter is, if the opposite decision was made and you wouldn't have called it back and said that was an error, then you have to then say, right, I would have given that as a penalty. If you'd have said that was a penalty, I would agree with you as a penalty. You then have to do that. And that whole situation itself is incredibly frustrating because of that element of it. They can hide behind the rule, and that's what they did. They hid behind that rule. And I'm not going to blame Liverpool for it. It's got nothing to do with them protecting Liverpool. It's got everything to do with protecting that on-field decision and the referee not having the ability in which to make a call on the pitch because they know they've got VAR. So they're failing to make decisions on the pitch. So they are, instead of rather making it an error of judgment, they're making no judgments. And by making no judgments, they're making errors. And that's part of the problem, that they are leaning so heavily on VAR and just being lazy with these calls, these big calls, because they do not want to be the one on the pitch to then make that decision. They want someone else to come up behind them and say, maybe you should review this, or we support you, just go and have a review just to double check. That's the problem in that the way VAR is being used. It's been used completely wrong, in my opinion. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Moyes maybe gets a little slap on the wrist, a little talk, because he was pretty strong in his words around the situation. And, you know, Moyes, and these are the quotes that he came with, you know, somebody in VAR didn't have enough football knowledge to understand that this would be close. Whoever it was close, not to send the referee to look at it. VAR should have said, you should go check this out. So VAR showed no respect whatsoever to us for this to be close and worth a call. He followed that on with, I'm not an expert on it. It refers to VAR reform and the handball rules and so on. But I just think maybe it should have been around, if you'd been around football or seen it or played it a bit more, you'd understand when people lunge. And that for that decision, it's because he lunged to get the ball. I totally understand breaking your fall, but he lunged. The ball had to be moved quickly because of the lunge, and because of that, it meant his arms are out and it hits his arms. He's got that. He's got to take responsibility for his actions if that's what you do. And Moyes is right. If West Ham player did that, I'd have said you were stupid. Why have you done that? What were you thinking? Because anyway, if you lunge in, you can potentially touch Danny Ings, take him down for a penalty. But he's lunged, his arms out. Fair enough, it's in a natural position, but he's lunged for the ball. He's in no control of his body. If you are falling to make a tackle or make a block, you're in control. You're putting your arm down to prevent your fall. There is no control of Thiago. He's completely out of control. He has thrown himself at the ball. His arms are, whilst beside him, they are ultimately there to flailing. There is no control of his body movement at all in that situation. And as Moyes has indicated, as Joe Cole said, poor defending like that has to be punished. And the simple fact of the matter is, the player's going to make that sort of decision, they should then be essentially put into a category where you're not in control of your own body. That handball rule in that case then can't be applied, such as it's not intentional. It's his sporting arm, because he's not in control of his movement at that point. He's completely off the floor as he's lunged into the ball to try and get it. And for the quick movement of Ings, or the quick thought of Ings, he's completely out of play. And he, by be connected with once and they didn't do it, I would accept it. But the fact that his arm hits the ball 3 times and then the ball goes away and is cleared is even more depressing. Now, VAR did apparently review it, but they chose not to call it back and to question it. And what is also just a little bit embarrassing and funny is then the response from Jurgen Klopp, speaking with BBC. They mentioned obviously about the controversy of the game and feeling relieved with one. And his response was, "I didn't see it back. What did you think?" The reporter was, "I thought it was a penalty." Obviously, very surprised, really. To which the reporter obviously claimed, I thought it was handball. And from apparently not seeing the ball or seeing the situation, not seeing it back, the response is, the hand was on the ball, but I think he drops down. So, and he also goes on to say, but I think the video cut off, unfortunately. So from not seeing the incident, you've now seen the incident, you have confirmed that his hand has touched the ball. Now, I think what an interesting follow-up question would have been, had that been in West Ham's penalty area, and that was one of your players, would you be playing that down? Would you be claiming it's a penalty? If that was at Anfield, would you be screaming for a penalty? And I think we all know what the answer is. And this is the problem, is that if that was Anfield, that is likely getting given. Again, I'm not saying it's going to get given because it's Liverpool. I'm just saying it's because it's the stadium it's at. And if it's the home team, it is likely getting given because the officials, I think, are so poor in this country. And they do have I wouldn't say a bias, but a preference in giving decisions to home teams when they are traditionally the bigger team. Again, that's not me stating that, it's Liverpool, they're giving more decisions. It's not that. It's just the way that these referees operate, that in a home game, I think had that been in Liverpool's area, that is 100% get given as a penalty, either by the referee on field or by VAR. The fact it hasn't been reviewed, as to Moyes' point, it does feel disrespectful. The simple fact of the matter is that ball hit his arm 3 times. Regardless of your interpretation of your view on the rules, it's an excessive number of times that ball has hit his arm, and the ref or the VAR should have turned around to the ref and say, you need to review this. Now, if the ref sticks with his on-field decision, fair enough. We can argue as much as we want about it, but if he then reviews it and then goes with the opinion that I am right, that's fine. But the ref should have been given the opportunity to have that chance to stick with his on-field decision or to go against his on-field decision. And that is the most galling thing about it, is the fact that the referee wasn't even offered or given the chance in which to push back, to review his own decision and then to make it. And again, it also feels it is a decision made by the referee as to, I'm not going to call this because I don't want to. I don't want to have the players come around me. I don't want the pressure of the situation on me. I do not want to call it. I don't want to give this decision. I'm just going to let it play on, and I'm going to see if VAR calls it back. Because then I say, well, I didn't see it. I didn't have a clear view. I didn't see it, which we all know he did. He can make his excuses, go to VAR, say, I have a clear view now. It's definitely a penalty. The fact of the matter is this weak refereeing. It's very weak officiating. And those in the VAR room have done a disservice, not to just to West Ham, but to the league that represent. Because quite frankly, any team that has that situation should have the referee be called back to review it. And if the referee sticks to his original decision, you 100% hold your hands up and have to say, fair enough. Don't have to agree with it, but you can say, at least he had the guts in which to stick with his on-field decision. And obviously what he saw was a complete accidental, fluke situation. And he agrees with that by watching it back. But if he watches it back and then gives a penalty, that the complexion of the game changes. And that's what the frustration was from that game, is that opportunity has cost us. But what I will say is that instance in itself is not what cost us the game. To refer back to just that point isn't where the game was won and lost. Where that game was won and lost is in our inability in which to communicate. We talk about this constantly, the ability for players to communicate or take responsibility in certain situations. That Gakpo goal was completely avoidable. Granted, they got a central overload and they did well in that situation. But again, it was an avoidable goal if one or two decisions were made differently. The second goal, the mismatch, from a tactical point of view, you have to question those on the bench who decided that kind of setup was correct. When they saw the very first one, why were they not telling the players to rejig positions, to get into a place where to counter Van Dijk and Matip running into the area? They didn't do that. Those on the pitch didn't do that. Those are the points where the game was won and lost. Not just the one goal, but both goals. Not just Ben Rama, but Antonio for the coaching staff for not recognising the inability to bring on players quicker in the game, to get some urgency, to get some fresher legs in the team that was looking leggy and tired. The players that came on, again, being ineffective once again. You don't have to question in particular, and again, I hate to have a go at Ings because it's unfair because I can see him trying, but the decision to go and purchase Danny Ings in January, you just have to question these decisions because they are impacting us at vital times. And whilst Moyes quite rightly recently has got a lot of praise for the results and the turnaround we've seen in some of those fixtures, it's still not good enough. There's still very questionable elements about how we operate in the transfer market. Still very questionable aspects as to how we are playing and the decisions we make, that in-game management that we make. And there are elements that is on the players, but that is also attitude comes from, from the bench or from the ball down to the manager and onto the field. Certain players not doing what they need to do, or certain players being overplayed and overran. Again, you can't always blame the players sometimes. You can't always blame Moyes. I don't necessarily blame Moyes completely for the goals because I do think players should have taken more responsibility. But there is an element of dysfunction within the setup, and for our game management as the game goes on, it just fails to recognise an opportunity where we're on top, where we maybe change things and bring someone else into play. And bringing players that are not in form and not connecting and working, they're still in there, still getting minutes, still playing. Again, we've got a very big game this weekend now. If we win against Palace, then we can finally take a bit of a breather. We maybe then look to add a little rotation in the next game. So when we go into the game against AZ Alkmaar, we can actually go in with a full-strength team. But we can't keep flogging the same players, because they are looking tired, they are looking leggy. We have a lot of games in a very short period. And if we go like we did last season, where we just flogged those players, played them in practically every game, regardless of fitness, fatigue's going to set in both physically, mentally, and you're going to see errors creep in that maybe wouldn't have crept in, strains happening and pulls happening here, there and everywhere. So it's a bit of a frustration because we have done so well of late. I do tend to agree, Cliff. It is, his in-game management is poor. I do question some of the decisions in terms of the market as well. When we look at Ings, he's too weak and needs to be in a box to be effective. Effectively he's a goal banger, and it's true, those decisions. And again, like I say, Moyes has done very well this year to kind of turn us around to a point. I think some of that has been flattered slightly by Europa Conference, but there are just these consistent frustrations, and they've been there all the time, and they don't seem to have learned from certain things, which is why I still have those warning signs and why I don't buy into this. If we win Europa League, Europa Conference, and we continue playing as we are, it's all fine and rosy, and let's all run off into the sunset holding hands with singing, Mosiah. I just just don't see it at this point, because I still see too many things that concern me going into next season, looking at the wider picture. I see too many things that concern me in this game. The in-game management piece again was frustrating. Maybe the lack of rotation, whilst I understand it, again, maybe didn't help the overall game. And some of the decisions on the pitch, again, is also highlighting as to the deficiencies in our squad and how we probably don't try and improve it. Over the course of the season, we're dropping players in and out when they're out of form or in form. And summer's going to be a really big job. I'm not sure we had the manager for it. I'd love to be proven wrong. That's what football's about, being proven wrong. Just at the moment, I can't see how we're able to elevate ourselves next season, because we're going to have very much the same turnaround and turnover again. Obviously, I've digressed a little bit away from the game. But one thing that I'd like to see is us to go into that Crystal Palace game to play positively. There were some very good things about that Liverpool game. Obviously, the VAR thing was very frustrating, very annoying. The goals we conceded were pretty sloppy, and Moyes also did state they were sloppy, which is, again, I think that's fair assessment, that those were sloppy goals to concede, and there were errors in there. We did have some very good moments in attack, but again, decision makers letting us down. Maybe we need to freshen things up in a couple of positions to help that kind of quickness in mind, to get some more energy on the pitch. But there are positives. And obviously there are negatives, but the positives are there. We are going in the right direction, and I understand those that want Moyes to stay. I understand those who want him to go. Everyone has to their opinion, and it's a fair. I think everyone's opinions are fair in most cases. But we need to go into the game against Palace. I'm not going to do a man of the match, to be honest. I just don't see the point. We lost. I just don't care. Just really don't care. But the positive thing is, we get a win against Palace, then we will be safe. 37 points this season is going to be enough in which to secure safety. I do not believe you're going to need much more than that. So if we can beat Palace, play the way we have against the likes of Arsenal, like we did against Ghent, like we have obviously against Liverpool in patches, then I seriously think that we really can start to relax in those final games this season and start to look up as opposed to down. We're not going to go very far up in the table, but we could at least kind of start to, look at things in a bit more of a positive light. Like I said, we play like we did against Bournemouth, like against Arsenal, and as we did in patches against Liverpool, we should have enough to beat Palace. It will not be an easy game. Palace are a decent enough team. They have a lot of pace, so we are going to have to be wary. But if we do play to our fullest, then there's no reason why we can't go there, get the 3 points, and secure our safety, and then start to concentrate on preparing for next season, for preparing to potentially get to Europa Conference final, which should be our minimum benchmark or a minimum achievement in that competition, and then obviously look to win. But yeah, it's been one of those days, I think, for me, so probably not as positive as I probably could be about the game. But there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Win against Palace, then again, I've said it for a while, I think we're safe now. But if we beat Palace, then I think we are good. We are safe, and we can start preparing our final onslaught for Europa Conference and start to think about what we're going to do next year. So with that being said, guys, we're going to end it there. If you have liked the video, despite how bad and depressing it may have been at times, please do like, please do subscribe. Again, share as well would be amazing. We've exceeded 500, which was a benchmark for us. We're really happy to do it now. Also, the next big aim is 1,000. It's a very big kind of reach, but that's where we want to go next. So again, please do like, subscribe, all of those things. Please do follow us on Twitter as well. We're coming up to the summer, so we will be starting to put together comprehensive lists on players who we can be looking at, who we should maybe be looking for. We'll be doing extra things on here as well in relation to players and so on. But until then, everyone, stay safe. Let's hopefully get the points this weekend. And as ever, come on, you Irons.